I was seconds away from signing everything I owned over to my son when a cup of tea was knocked out of my hands and changed my fate forever. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 66 years old, and for most of my life I believed that if you worked hard, loved your family, and stayed honest, life would eventually reward you with peace. That belief was already cracking on the morning my son asked me to attend what he called a simple family meeting. It was a Tuesday in early October, the kind of quiet fall morning where the world feels slow and polite. I had built Hale Medical Supply from nothing after my husband passed away 15 years earlier. What started as a small regional distributor had grown into a business worth several $million. I did not build it for prestige. I built it to survive. And later, I built it so my son would never have to struggle the way I once did. Daniel is my only child, 38 years old, intelligent, ambitious, always impatient. He had joined the business 5 years earlier and made it very clear he believed the company should already be his. His wife, Lila, agreed with him on everything. She always did. That morning, Daniel insisted we meet at my house instead of the office. He said it would feel more personal, more comfortable. That should have been my first warning. I woke early, as usual, and followed my routine: shower, medication, breakfast. I sat in the living room reviewing documents Daniel had emailed the night before. They were labeled as preliminary succession papers. Nothing urgent, nothing final. Or so I thought. Lila arrived just after 9. She was dressed impeccably, soft colors, calm smile, hair pulled back like someone who wanted to appear gentle and trustworthy. In her hands was a tray with a teapot and 2 delicate cups. "I made you something special," she said warmly. "A calming herbal blend. It is supposed to support heart health. You have been under so much stress lately." The way she said stress made it sound like a diagnosis rather than concern. Daniel followed her in moments later, briefcase in hand, eyes already scanning the room, as if measuring what would soon belong to him. He kissed my cheek, distant, distracted. "Mom, today is about making sure everything is set up properly. You deserve to rest, to enjoy your life." I smiled, though something tightened in my chest. I had heard that sentence too many times lately. Leela poured the tea herself and handed me the cup. It smelled unfamiliar, slightly bitter beneath the floral notes. She watched me closely as I lifted it. Before I could take more than a sip, Daniel began speaking. He talked about legacy, responsibility, protecting the company from risk. He placed a thick folder on the table between us and slid it toward me. "These are just formalities," he said. "Power of attorney updates, operational control. Temporary. We can revisit everything later." Temporary is a dangerous word when spoken by someone waiting for you to disappear. As I held the cup in my hands, a strange unease settled over me. My heart felt louder, my thoughts slightly slow. I told myself it was nerves, or age, or the unfamiliar tea. Then Elena walked into the room. Elena had been my caregiver for 6 years, quiet, observant, steady in ways that mattered. She carried a stack of folded linens she did not need to carry. As she passed beside me, her elbow struck my hand. The cup tipped. Tea spilled across my lap and onto the floor. Before anyone could react, She leaned close and whispered, barely moving her lips, "Do not drink that. Please, just trust me." And in that moment, I knew this meeting was never about my retirement. It was about my end. The room froze for a fraction of a second after the tea spilled, the silence thick and unnatural, as if everyone was waiting to see who would speak first. Leela reacted immediately. "Elena, what are you doing?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. "That was a delicate cup. Do you have any idea how careless that was?" "I am so sorry, Mrs. Hale," Elena said quickly, already kneeling to blot the spill with a cloth. Her hands were steady, too steady for an accident. She did not look at Lila. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at me. Daniel let out an impatient breath. "This is exactly why I said we should not have interruptions today." "It is fine," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Accidents happen." But my heart was pounding now, not from embarrassment, but from the echo of Elena's whisper. "Do not drink that. Please, just trust me." Lila reached for the teapot again, her movements tight, controlled. "Let me pour you another cup. You barely touched it." "No, thank you," I replied. "I suddenly do not feel very well." That was not entirely a lie. A faint dizziness had begun to creep in, subtle but unmistakable, like the room had shifted half an inch to the left. My fingers felt warmer than they should have. Daniel frowned. "Mom, we really should get through this paperwork while we are all here." I nodded slowly and reached for the documents instead. As I did, Elena stood and moved to the sideboard, pretending to rearrange items that had not moved in years. She stayed within sight, watching. Daniel launched into his explanation again, pointing to signature lines, speaking faster now. Too fast. Words like efficiency and protection repeated over and over, as if rehearsed. Halfway through his speech, my vision blurred. I blinked, once, then twice. The room seemed to tilt, the edges softening. A strange pressure built behind my eyes, and my heartbeat began to race, irregular and loud in my ears. "Margaret," Lila said softly, "are you all right? You look pale." Before I could answer, she lifted her own cup. "I will finish mine then," she said lightly. "It would be a shame to waste it." The cup barely touched her lips when her expression changed. It was subtle at first, a flicker of confusion. Then her hand trembled. "Daniel," she said, her voice suddenly thin. "Something is wrong." She stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. Her face drained of color as she pressed a hand to her chest. The next moments unfolded too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Lila collapsed. Her body hit the floor hard, the sound sharp and final. Her limbs jerked violently, eyes unfocused, mouth struggling to form words that never came. Daniel shouted her name, dropping to his knees beside her, panic flooding his voice. "Call an ambulance," I said, though my own words sounded distant. Elena was already moving, dialing with practiced precision, her face composed but grim. As sirens wailed faintly in the distance, I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the woman convulsing on my living room floor. The tea, the warning, the spill. Understanding hit me with a force that stole my breath. The drink was never meant for her. It was meant for me. And if Elena had not knocked that cup from my hands, I would be the one on the floor, shaking, dying, while my son stood over me, pretending to be afraid. As the paramedics burst through the door, I looked at Daniel. For the first time that morning, he did not look surprised. He looked cornered. And in that moment, I realized something far more terrifying than poison had been served at my table. Betrayal had been planned long before the tea ever touched my lips. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and cold metal, the kind of sterile air that makes every thought sharper and every fear louder. Lila was rushed past us on a gurney, her body still trembling slightly as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. Daniel followed close behind, his face twisted into something that looked like concern. But now that I knew where to look, it felt rehearsed, like a mask put on too late. I was placed in a chair in the waiting area, a blanket draped over my shoulders, even though I was not cold. Elena stood a few steps away, hands folded, eyes lowered. She did not pace. She did not cry. She waited. After nearly an hour, Daniel was called back to speak with the doctor. The moment he disappeared down the hall, Elena moved closer to me. "Mrs. Hale," she said quietly, "we need to talk. Not here." I looked up at her. My head felt clearer now, the dizziness fading, replaced by a heavy certainty that whatever she was about to say would change my life forever. "Tell me," I said. She hesitated only a second. "I should have spoken sooner. I was afraid you would think I was imagining things. Or worse, that you would confront them before I could protect you." "Protect me from what?" Elena took a breath, steadying herself. "From being poisoned." The word landed between us, heavy and undeniable. "For months," she continued, "you have felt tired, dizzy, confused. You blamed stress, age. I watched it happen only on certain days, days when Leela handled your drinks or meals." I closed my eyes, memories flooding back. The mornings I could barely finish breakfast. The afternoons when numbers on a page refused to make sense. The nights I fell asleep in my chair without meaning to. "I started keeping notes 3 months ago," Elena said. "Dates, symptoms, who was present, what you consumed." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "I did not show anyone, not even my sister. I needed to be sure." My hands trembled as I took it from her. Page after page was filled with careful handwriting. October 3rd, dizziness after tea. Leela prepared it. October 14th, nausea and weakness. Leela arrived early. November 1st, heart palpitations after breakfast smoothie. "This morning," Elena went on, her voice lower now, "I saw her add more than usual. I knew it was different, stronger. I knew if you drank it, you would not survive the day." My throat tightened. "Why did you not go to the police?" "Because I had no proof yet, and because your son warned me." That snapped my eyes open. "Daniel told me to stay out of family matters," Elena said. "He said I was becoming a liability, that I should remember my place." She swallowed hard. "I knew if I accused them too soon, they would destroy the evidence. Or you." The reality settled in slowly, cruel and precise. This was not an impulse. It was a process. A doctor approached then, asking for consent forms, explaining that Lila was stable but critical. Suspected toxic ingestion. Blood tests underway. The police would be notified. When he left, Elena leaned in one last time. "Mrs. Hale," she said, What happened today was not a mistake. It was the end of something they have been doing for a long time. I stared at the double doors leading to the emergency room, behind which my daughter-in-law lay fighting poison meant for me. And in that moment, the truth became unavoidable. Someone had been slowly killing me in my own home, and the person who loved me enough to stop it was not my son. It was the woman everyone else overlooked. I did not confront Daniel that night. I watched him instead. Back in the waiting area, he paced with his phone pressed to his ear, voice low, back turned toward me. He nodded often, too often. When he noticed me looking, he stopped pacing immediately and slipped the phone into his pocket, his expression rearranging itself into concern. "Mom, you should go home and rest," he said gently. "This has been a shock for you." A shock, not fear, not relief that I was safe. A shock, as if what mattered most was the disruption of a plan. I told him I would stay, that I wanted to hear directly from the doctors. He did not argue. That should have reassured me. Instead, it confirmed something was wrong. When the police arrived, Daniel was ready. He spoke calmly, clearly. He described the morning as an unfortunate accident. He mentioned Elena's clumsiness. He emphasized Lila's fragile health. He never once mentioned the tea, not until the officer asked directly, "Where did the drink come from?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Lila made it, for all of us." For all of us. That night, after Daniel finally left the hospital, I did not go home. I checked into a small hotel 2 blocks away and asked Elena to meet me there. I needed privacy and truth. In the dim light of the room, Elena sat across from me, hands folded, posture rigid. "There is more," she said before I could ask. "About your son." My stomach tightened. "He has been asking questions for months," she continued. "About your will, about insurance, about what would happen if you became incapacitated. He asked me once how quickly the company would transfer if something happened to you suddenly." I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, quietly, like ice giving way under too much weight. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Numbers I had never scrutinized closely before now stared back at me. Small transfers, frequent, carefully spaced, always just below the threshold that would trigger alerts. I checked another account, then another. By the time I set the phone down, my hands were shaking. "He has been moving money," I said. Elena nodded, slowly. "Yes. I saw documents on his desk last month, account numbers that did not belong to the company. Your name was not on them." In that moment, the final illusion collapsed. This was not about inheritance anxiety, or impatience, or even greed alone. This was premeditation. My son had not been waiting for me to retire. He had been waiting for me to die. I thought of every time he had commented on my health, every suggestion that I slow down, every moment he insisted I let Lila handle things for me. It had never been care. It had been preparation. The next morning, the hospital confirmed what Elena already knew. Lila had ingested a powerful toxin, one that accumulates slowly, one that mimics natural decline until the final dose. The doctor said it plainly. Whoever prepared that drink understood exactly what they were doing. I sat alone after that, staring out the hotel window as the city woke up below me. 66 years of motherhood. 38 years of loving one child with everything I had. And somewhere along the way, without me noticing, my son had stopped seeing me as his mother. I was an obstacle, and he was willing to remove me. The investigation moved faster than I expected, as if everything had already been waiting just beneath the surface. By noon, detectives were at the hospital and at my house. I gave them permission to search everything: the kitchen, the study, the garage, every drawer I had trusted my son to open freely. Daniel arrived an hour later with a lawyer. That was the moment I stopped hoping I was wrong. He walked in composed, almost irritated, as if the police presence were an inconvenience rather than a response to attempted murder. He barely looked at me. Instead, he spoke to the officers, explaining that emotions were high, that misunderstandings happen during medical emergencies, that his wife was the real victim here. One of the detectives asked him a simple question: "Has your mother been unwell recently?" Daniel did not hesitate. "Yes," he said, "for months. Fatigue, confusion, heart issues. We were worried it might be the beginning of something serious." The words landed like a blade. He had prepared that answer. Blood tests came back that afternoon. Traces of the same toxin found in Lila's system were present in mine. Lower levels, older exposure, consistent with repeated ingestion over time. The detective explained it gently, but the meaning was brutal. I had been poisoned slowly, methodically, carefully enough that no single doctor visit would raise alarms. That evening, Elena brought the rest of her evidence to the station: photographs she had taken quietly, short audio recordings captured when she thought something was wrong, notes documenting dates when Daniel and Lila discussed my health in tones that had nothing to do with concern. The next day, police executed a warrant on Daniel's office. They found insurance policies taken out in my name without my knowledge, several of them, each naming Daniel as the sole beneficiary. They found emails between Daniel and Lila discussing timing, dosage, how long it would take before I became too weak to notice money disappearing from the business. And then they found the draft, a revised will, unsigned, undated, but clear. It left everything to Daniel, nothing to charity, nothing to the foundation I had planned, nothing to the employees who had stayed with me for decades. I was alive only because Elena had knocked a cup from my hands. Daniel was arrested that night. He did not resist. He did not shout. He looked at me once as they led him away, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes. Not regret, fear. Fear that the plan had failed. Lila survived, barely. She regained consciousness 2 days later, weak and furious. She claimed ignorance at first, said she drank the tea by accident, said she was just following Daniel's instructions. But the evidence did not support that story. They had planned together. Phone records showed late-night calls, texts filled with coded language they believed no one would ever decode. A shared understanding that my death was not a question of if, but when. The police told me something else that chilled me more than all of it. The dose meant for me that morning would have stopped my heart within hours. If Elena had been late, if her hand had slipped a second later, if I had finished that cup, I would not have made it to the hospital. That night, alone in the hotel room, I finally let myself feel it. The grief. Not for what I almost lost, but for who my son had become. I did not cry for the company, or the money, or even my own life. I cried for the little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, because that child was gone, and the man who replaced him had tried to bury me. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere, as if the air itself had been stripped of anything human. Daniel sat at the defense table in a dark suit that no longer fit him properly. He had lost weight in custody. His jaw was tighter, his eyes sharper, calculating. Lila sat beside him, pale and fragile in appearance, her hands folded in her lap, as if she were the victim of a long illness rather than the architect of one. They did not look at each other. That was the first thing I noticed. The prosecution began by laying out the facts with clinical precision: medical reports, financial records, insurance documents, a clear timeline showing how my health declined in perfect alignment with the days Lila prepared my drinks. When the toxin was named, there was a murmur in the courtroom. It was not fast-acting. It was designed to weaken, to confuse, to imitate age and stress until the final dose made death appear natural. Then came the recordings. Elena's quiet voice explaining when she pressed record. Daniel's voice discussing how long it would take before I could no longer question the paperwork. Lila laughing softly, saying I would never even realize what was happening. I did not look at them while the recordings played. I watched the jury. One woman pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in the front row shook his head slowly, as if trying to reject what he was hearing. When it was the defense's turn, Daniel's attorney stood and spoke calmly, confidently. He painted Daniel as a devoted son manipulated by a controlling wife, a man driven by fear of being cut out of the business he had given his life to, a man who made poor decisions under emotional pressure. Then Lila took the stand. Her voice trembled. Her eyes filled with tears that came too easily. She said Daniel told her I was planning to leave him nothing, that he said I wanted to sell the company and abandon him, that she believed she was protecting her family. The lie was clean, practiced, almost convincing, until the prosecutor asked one question. If you believed you were protecting your husband, why did you track Margaret Hale's symptoms week by week in a private journal? The courtroom went silent. The journal was displayed on a screen. Lila's handwriting, dates, notes, dosage adjustments, predictions. It was not fear that had driven her. It was control. Daniel's attorney shifted tactics after that. He argued that I had exaggerated, that Elena had influenced me, that perhaps my symptoms were psychosomatic. That was when Elena took the stand. She spoke quietly, clearly, without anger. She described what she saw, what she recorded, why she waited, why she risked everything to stop it. I watched Daniel then. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Because Elena was not emotional. She was precise, and precision destroys lies. By the time closing arguments ended, the courtroom felt heavy with certainty. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not desperation. This was a plan, and everyone in that room knew it, including my son. The verdict did not come quickly. The jury deliberated for 2 full days, and in that time I learned a strange truth about waiting. It is not the fear that hurts the most. It is the silence. The empty hours where your mind replays every moment of your life, searching for the exact point where love turned into entitlement, where trust became a weakness someone decided to exploit. When the bailiff finally announced that a decision had been reached, the courtroom filled again. Daniel stood as the jurors filed in, his hands clasped in front of him, face carefully neutral. Lila stared straight ahead, her jaw rigid, as if refusing to acknowledge the room around her. I did not look at either of them. I watched the foreperson. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Daniel Hale, guilty. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, not in shock, but in resignation. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. A sound escaped Lila then, not a cry, more like a sharp breath pulled too fast. On the charge of financial exploitation and fraud, guilty. The verdicts for Lila followed. Guilty on all counts. The words settled over the room like dust after a collapse. No gasps, no shouting, just the heavy understanding that something permanent had happened. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week, but the outcome was already clear. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. When asked if I wished to speak, before sentencing, I stood. My legs felt steady, even though my heart ached in a way I knew would never fully heal. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I told the truth. I spoke about the mornings I trusted my son to protect me, about the business I built so he would never feel insecure, about the quiet fear of realizing that the person who should have loved me most had chosen my death as a solution. I said I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I refused to carry poison in my own heart any longer. I said forgiveness did not mean reconciliation, and it did not mean forgetting. When I sat back down, Daniel finally looked at me. There was no apology in his eyes, only the realization that everything he believed he was entitled to was gone forever. The judge spoke clearly and without emotion when sentencing was delivered. Life without parole, for both of them. As they were led away in restraints, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because they were punished, but because the truth had been spoken aloud, in a place where lies could not survive. The boy I raised was gone, but the woman I had become was still standing. And for the first time since the tea spilled on my living room floor, I knew I would survive what came next. I did not return to the house. When the trial ended and the noise finally faded, I understood that some places hold too much truth to ever feel safe again. Every room in that house carried the memory of whispered plans and measured drops, of love used as camouflage for cruelty. I sold it quietly and never looked back. I moved to a smaller town along the coast, somewhere anonymous, where no one knew my last name or my history. The ocean was close enough to hear at night, steady and indifferent, reminding me that the world continues even after betrayal tries to freeze it in place. Elena came with me, not as an employee, not as a caregiver, as family. In the months that followed, we rebuilt more than my health. We rebuilt purpose. Together we created a foundation to protect older adults from financial and physical abuse, especially when that abuse comes from within their own families. People do not like to believe these stories. They want to think blood guarantees safety. I once believed that too. Letters came from people who recognized pieces of their own lives in my story. Parents whose children controlled their money. Widows who were told they were confused when they asked questions. Elderly men who were isolated by those who claimed to care for them. The silence around their suffering was the most dangerous part. Years passed. I am 73 now. Every morning, Elena and I share tea at the kitchen table. We choose it together. We drink it slowly. Trust is not something we rush anymore. The foundation grew beyond anything I imagined. We helped stop crimes before they became funerals. We taught doctors, bankers, and neighbors how to recognize warning signs, how to listen when something feels wrong, even if the person speaking is considered invisible. Daniel wrote to me from prison in the early years. I returned the letters unopened. Forgiveness gave me peace. Distance gave me safety. Both were necessary. Leela died in custody 4 years after sentencing. I felt nothing when I heard. No anger, no relief. Just the quiet understanding that people who live by poison rarely escape it. Sometimes people ask me what saved my life. They expect me to say luck or instinct or God. But the truth is simpler. I was saved by someone who paid attention. Someone who refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. I learned that family is not defined by who shares your blood, but by who stands between you and harm when it matters most. The tea that was meant to end my life became the moment my real life began. And if there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this. When someone warns you in a whisper, listen. It may be the bravest voice you ever hear.